Ontario's NDP leader makes a stop in Thunder Bay. City Council votes against sanctions for one of its members. And the Ukrainian president delivers a powerful speech to Parliament. Good evening and thank you for joining us. Ontario NDP leader Andrea Horwath paid a visit to Thunder Bay today.
She spoke about healthcare needs in the north at the Lakehead Nurse Practitioner-led clinic on Archibald Street. This as the Ford government announced more than $750,000 in funding for that same clinic. Lee Noonan has more.
I'm pleased that by visiting communities, it helps shake some money out of the government. That's a positive thing.
The funding will allow the nurse practitioner-led clinic to hire 2 nurse practitioners, 2 support staff, and 2 receptionists, increasing their patient capacity by 1,600 up to 5,800. Also, presumably, shortening the long wait times for new patients.
How long is the wait, for?
Oh, 2 years.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Executive Director Pam Delgatti explains that clinics such as theirs serve an important role in providing primary care to patients who might otherwise not receive the care they need, which can increase the strain on the rest of the healthcare system.
And when people don't have access to this, they go to somewhere like the emergency because they need their medication. And in doing so, it's tying up resources and it's preventing people that do need emergency services from getting it. So we have to make sure that this is something that is available for all people.
Horwath was in the city to announce her party's plan to deal with a shortage of healthcare providers in Northern Ontario, which they will be putting forward next week. She also spoke about reforming the Northern Travel Grant, getting rid of salary caps for healthcare workers, and increasing efforts to hire and retain medical professionals in Northern communities.
Making sure that there's housing available, so housing that's adequate and appropriate for healthcare providers to be able to live in smaller communities, live in northern communities, live in rural communities, but also there are other pieces as well. Working with communities to ensure, for example, that there are employment opportunities for other members of family, particularly spouses. As we know, people are not going to relocate to a community that doesn't have educational standards in terms of the number and availability of schools for kids.
Horwath also emphasized the importance of using resources already in place in Northern Ontario, including retaining healthcare professionals who are already in the region and increasing the number of spaces at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine.
Without a solid plan, we're going to continue to see what we've seen for decades here in Northern Ontario, which is, as we've already talked about, lack of access, lack of health professionals across the spectrum, and people not getting the health care they deserve.
Lee Noonan, TBT News.
Well, the provincial government has also fulfilled another of Horwath's healthcare wishes, adding medical student spaces at a number of universities across the province, including at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine.
We're talking about NOSM, the Northern Ontario School of Medicine, increasing the number of spaces there.
Adding 160 undergraduate positions and 295 postgraduate positions to Ontario's medical schools.
71 of the new med school and residency spaces announced by the provincial government are for NOSM. 30 are undergraduate seats, with another 41 positions for postgraduate students. NOSM Dean Dr. Sarita Verma is particularly excited about increases in medical residencies in Northern Ontario and how that will help alleviate the critical doctor shortage in the region.
And so when they do their training and they stay here for those 2 years or 5 years, it's very likely they're going to lay down roots. But also because of the uniqueness and the award-winning curriculum that NOSM has, that we train people in community, right? They actually learn where they're going to practice. They like it and they stay. So we find that if you do your MD degree and you stay to your residency, almost 90% of our people stay.
The increase will be phased in over 5 years. NOSM's new med school spaces will be divided almost evenly between the Thunder Bay and Sudbury campuses.
The pandemic has exposed many shortcomings in Ontario's healthcare system. With more on the resources that the province is trying to bring online over the next number of years, here's Colin DeMello.
With parts of the world dealing with a COVID-19 surge driven by a subvariant of Omicron, Ontario isn't expressing a lot of concern.
We have been following the BA2 variant very closely. Dr. Moore is studying it. We expect that it may be the 50% of the cases that we have in Ontario within the next short period of time. And it's not causing many more hospitalizations or more intensive treatments.
But the experience of other countries has led to new worries among those in healthcare who warn that workers simply cannot handle another wave.
If we hit another variant and we do not have the conditions of work improved, which include wages, but also more full-time jobs, better benefits, then I can't see people running to be employed in this sector.
The government has been trying to boost the number of healthcare workers before the next healthcare crisis, giving nurses a $5,000 retention bonus, announcing additional spots for would-be medical students in Ontario universities, and now promising that personal support workers will get a permanent raise.
We've built up our healthcare system. We've built up our healthcare system to be able to handle an increase, and we've learned a tremendous amount over the last 2 years.
The government will table legislation to give 158,000 PSWs a raise. Personal support workers in long-term care and community care will receive a $3 an hour pay bump, and those in hospital would get $2 an hour extra.
We've seen over the last 2 years how they've stepped up to the plate. They've done an incredible job. When we saw the challenges in long-term care, who stepped up? All the PSWs.
It's a start, advocates say, but one that's long overdue.
There's been a shortage of healthcare frontline workers for a number of years pre-COVID. And then the pandemic hit. And what the pandemic really did was just open up the blinds to the public about a crisis that had been existing for some time.
Now they hope it'll be enough to head off a future crisis.
The number of COVID-19 patients at the Regional Health Sciences Centre is down slightly once again today. There are now 22 COVID-positive patients inside the hospital, one fewer than yesterday, but the number of ICU patients has risen from 6 to 7. The hospital is now operating at 104% capacity, while the ICU is 77% full. Meanwhile, the weekly vaccination numbers continue to dwindle across the Thunder Bay District Health Unit's catchment area. Just 803 shots were administered last week, down from 857 the week before. According to the Ministry of Health, nearly 90% of people across the district aged 5 and up have received at least one dose, while 85% have gotten at least 2 shots.
Kenora MP Eric Melillo has been sanctioned by the Russian government. He's one of the 313 Canadian officials who've been targeted in a release from the Russian Foreign Ministry. They're retaliatory sanctions in response to those issued by Canada on Russian officials and oligarchs. Melillo is now banned from Russia, something he says he considers a, quote, badge of honor for publicly supporting Ukraine. Other notable Canadian officials facing sanctions will include Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, and Defense Minister Anita Anand. We'll have more on that later in the news hour.
Well, meanwhile, here locally, outspoken Thunder Bay City Councillor Aldo Roberto will not be sanctioned after all for comments he made about an incident at a local homeless encampment last summer. City Council initially voted to implement the sanctions, but the ratification vote failed last night on a tie. Vasilios Bellows has more.
Monday night's vote reversed a previous one from February that would have seen Councillor Roberto docked 5 days' pay, or just under $600. The issue centers around a comment that Roberto had made on Facebook after a truck had driven over a tent in the County Fair Plaza, an area frequented by people experiencing homelessness, where he hoped that it was the wind that blew over the tent. The Integrity Commission found that the comment made by the at-large councillor was an innocent explanation for the actions. The matter was settled on a 5-5 vote, though the 2 missing councillors voted against the sanction last time around.
I feel really good because, the council finally decided that, yes, it was appropriate. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not being penalized. There's no suspension. And that's what it's about. I don't care if I get fined or anything like that. That means nothing. The whole point of the matter is I didn't do anything wrong. Council supports me on it, and I'm glad that it's been taken care of.
The Integrity Commission's recommendation for a sanction against Roberto was backed by the fear his Facebook post could influence the ongoing police investigation. Councillor Shelby Chung, who did vote for the sanction, did not feel this to be true, but stressed that city councillors need to remember their influence when making comments.
Contrary to how we feel sometimes, members of the public do listen. And you can say something as innocent as, I hope X cures COVID, but X might not be good for people to consume. And yet we put it out there in the universe because people assume we know more than we actually do.
There was a second recommendation from the Integrity Commission that was approved on a 7-3 vote to develop social media guidelines for councillors. Councillor Kristen Oliver supported the motion, believing it is important to put set social media rules in place.
There's lots of things I would love to say, but we just have to be restrained and respectful of the process. We are city councillors. We don't have it's not a wise choice for us to go on and say everything that we're thinking about without recognizing that it could have some sort of impacts.
Administration will now be tasked with figuring out exactly what these social media guidelines would look like for city councillors. If they are approved, it is unsure exactly when councillors will have to begin adhering to them. Vasilios Bellos, TBT News.
Also on last night's council agenda, the proposed multi-use indoor turf facility is still on pause, and administration is recommending that it stay that way, at least for now. That's because the city is still waiting on a funding decision from Infrastructure Canada that would cover about half the total cost of the nearly $44 million project. Administration is also recommending that the city not sink any more money into the project until the decision on the federal funding is made. City Manager Norm Gale understands that it's not the news that some on council or in the community really wanted to hear.
This does lead to frustration. That this is a clearly iterated priority by City Council. We appreciate that people will be frustrated by continuing waiting, but we think the opportunity is significant and it's important.
There's no timeline for that funding response from Infrastructure Canada.
Well, time is running out to negotiate a deal between Ontario's 24 colleges and the union representing about 16,000 professors, instructors, counselors, and librarians. OPSEU officials have sent an ultimatum to the colleges, threatening to walk off the job on Friday. Mitchell Ringos has more.
After multiple declined offers, OPSEU members have been under a work-to-rule job action for the last 3 months, hoping to pressure the College Employer Council to return to the table. Local OPSEU President Rebecca Ward says since then the colleges have not reached out to negotiate, prompting the union to announce a full walkout starting on Friday, unless the council agrees to binding interest arbitration of the remaining issues. Ward believes if the colleges deny involving a neutral party now, it will just happen later after they walk off the job.
If they force this, they construct a strike as they have been all along, and we end up on a picket line on the 18th, we will end up in interest arbitration in the end anyway. So instead of doing that now, the colleges are forcing students to risk losing their semester and having faculty walk a picket line to then end up being legislated into interest arbitration anyway.
SUCI President Ronnie Cassana says this is clearly not in the interest of the students. It's been 5 years since the college teachers last took to the picket lines in a display that lasted over a month's time. Cassana is not happy students are stuck in the middle of the negotiations and is hoping the issue can be resolved quickly.
It's adversely affected the student body even in 2017 it caused a lot of financial issues to all our student body, and of course the quality of education also go down because of any labor dispute.
In a response sent by Ontario colleges, they said OPSEU's decision to call a strike by academic staff on March 18th is short-sighted and comes at the expense of students and the college system. But for now, it's just a waiting game until Friday to see if a deal can be met by the two parties. Mitchell Ringos, TBT News.
Fort William Historical Park is hosting March Break Day camps once again, allowing locals to step back in time to the 1800s to experience history through the eyes of past generations.
Like a tiny explosion happened.
It is like a tiny explosion. That's exactly right.
like a bomb fires something out of the front of the gun.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
It's the first March Break Day camp since the pandemic began. Participants can enjoy an array of fun and exciting events like outdoor games, crafts, while learning about the fur trade and traditional Indigenous activities. The March Break Day camp runs through Friday from 9 to 4. Park officials are also pleased to offer guided tours once again at one of North America's largest living history sites. Communications Officer Emily Carr is glad that on-site learning is back.
Like, our purpose here is to educate about different worldviews, the heritage and culture of many different people that would have lived and worked at Fort William or around the area. And it's just great to be able to pass that message on again and keep working on that educational portion that we strive so hard to disseminate across the region and beyond.
I just learned how you fire a musket. It was really cool seeing him load it and fire it.
Carr says if all goes to plan, they'll reopen full-time in May with all of the regular annual events.
What a great day for that today, Fiona, with the gorgeous temperatures outside. That snow is starting to melt.
It is starting to melt, though if you are getting outside to enjoy it, be aware it's also making things a little bit slippery in some locations. I have already landed on my tuchus at least once, so it's definitely out there. And that's because although the overnight lows are well below the freezing mark, we hit a low of -12 earlier in the pre-dawn hours, we did warm up to 5 Celsius, well above normal for this time of year with a fair amount of cloud cover. If we take a look what's going on across the region, very mild temperatures to the west, 9 in Atikokan and 8 in Fort Frances. It cools off as you head further north into Kenora at 4, 6 in Dryden, but then it bottoms out in Red Lake, much cooler to these more northern areas. Red Lake currently on the freezing mark, and that is the high for the day. 3 in Armstrong and in Greenstone, despite a fair amount of sunshine. Marathon also a little bit cool along the North Shore at 1 Celsius, but Sault Ste. Marie, a fair amount of sunshine and 5. Tonight, we will drop just barely below the freezing mark. We have a freezing rain warning for Thunder Bay and areas to the west. So we do have a little bit of ice potentially moving in late, but the mild temperatures will continue for Wednesday, and as those temperatures rise above the freezing mark, and it won't take much, we're looking like we are going to have some showers move through Lake Superior, and I'll have more details later on in the news hour.
Okay, thanks a lot, Fiona. Well, an historic speech today in Canadian Parliament, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the members virtually, a very personal and very passionate speech, referring to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau by first name, saying, Justin, what if this was happening in Canadian cities, in Toronto, in Vancouver, appealing for that no-fly zone. We will have all the details as your news hour continues.
Close the airspace. Please stop the bombing. How many more cruise missiles have to fall on our cities?
In a historic virtual address to the Canadian Parliament, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky painted a dire picture of the daily devastation in Ukraine and called for more help from Canada and other allies.
His address comes on the same day that the Russian government banned more than 300 Canadians, as we told you earlier, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, from entering that country. Annie Bergeron-Oliver has the latest details.
For the first time in 2 years, guests packed the gallery in the House of Commons.
Our friend, Volodymyr Zelensky.
An in-person audience for an emotional virtual address by Ukraine's president.
Every night is a horrible night. Russians are shelling from all kinds of artillery, from tanks. They're hitting civilian infrastructure. They're hitting big buildings.
Volodymyr Zelensky's 13-minute speech was personal and powerful, repeatedly asking what it would be like if Canadian cities or landmarks were being bombed daily. He thanked Canada for sanctions on Russia, but called for help imposing a no-fly zone.
Please close the sky. Close the airspace. Please stop the bombing. How many more cruise missiles have to fall on our cities until you make this happen?
Canada has shied away from that move, focusing instead on delivering aid, equipment, and sanctions. 15 new leaders were sanctioned today.
I've always thought of you as a champion for democracy. And now democracies around the world are lucky to have you as our champion.
The Conservative leader, however, appears to support a modified no-fly zone.
We need to protect, at a minimum, the airspace over the humanitarian corridors so that Ukrainians can seek safe passage away from the war zones and to allow humanitarian relief to reach those areas under siege.
The war, now in its 20th day, is becoming more dangerous. In the capital, Kyiv, where the president is, Russian forces are escalating their attacks. Makeshift hospitals are being set up in underground bomb shelters, and increasingly, residential buildings like this 15-story apartment are among the targets.
It's international criminal case. What Russians do it with civilian people in our country.
President Zelensky will continue talking about the war in his country tomorrow when he gives a speech to the U.S. Congress. Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV News, Ottawa.
2 more journalists have died while covering the war in Ukraine. Fox News cameraman Pierre Zakshevsky was killed after his vehicle was struck by incoming fire outside of Kyiv. Reporter Benjamin Hall was also injured and remains in hospital. And Ukrainian journalist Oleksandra Kuvshinova was also killed in the same incident. Ukraine's Interior Minister blames shelling by Russian forces. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price says their deaths are a tragedy and that he's hoping for Ben Hall's speedy recovery.
Have always been a balm for the very tough questions that he would always hurl my way at the way of Secretary Blinken. I know I speak for the Secretary when I say that we look forward, once again, hopefully very soon, to being on the receiving end of all of those. We have engaged at multiple levels with Fox News. We have made very clear that we will do everything we possibly can to help Ben and any others who may have been involved and injured in this horrific attack.
One COVID rule is still universal. To get on a plane, you need to be vaccinated. So the fact that a few convoy protesters may have dodged that directive is now under investigation. Glenn McGregor has the details on that.
Most protesters who joined the so-called Freedom Convoy arrived in Ottawa after a grueling highway drive. But a small number had an easier trip on a private chartered aircraft. CTV News has learned that Transport Canada is now looking into whether a flight to the capital with protest supporters aboard breached rules requiring most air travelers be vaccinated. Transport Canada has been made aware of the incident and is following up with the air operator to ensure compliance, the department said in a statement. At a bail hearing last month for protest organizer Tamara Leach, her husband Dwayne told the court he'd come to Ottawa aboard a private jet. But according to another passenger on the flight, Leach was mistaken.
I can tell you right now that that plane was not a super powerful
private jet that propelled us through space and time to get there in luxury.
Chad Eros is an accountant from Saskatchewan who helped coordinate GoFundMe donations to the convoy. He said he arranged for a small twin turboprop to bring a team of lawyers to help the protesters.
They didn't even know how they were going to get out to Ottawa because lots of them weren't vaccinated. So I know of a chartered plane that...
In fact, Transport Canada says the mandate applies to passengers on charter flights too. Eros described a flight path with multiple stops that corresponds to the route taken by a Beech King Air turboprop that flew from Calgary to Edmonton, to Medicine Hat, where Dwayne Leach lived, then to Saskatoon, and a detour to Regina, where Eros boarded, before heading to Winnipeg, Thunder Bay, and finally Ottawa. The operator of that aircraft, a company in Peace River, Alberta, would not respond to multiple requests for comment from CTV News. After being released on bail, Leach left Ottawa for Medicine Hat in a pickup truck, not on a private plane. The potential penalties for breaking the vaccine mandate run as high as $5,000 per passenger and $25,000 for the air carrier that flies them. Glenn McGregor, CTV News, Ottawa.
Newly released court documents offer insight into the case against terror suspect Nathaniel Veltman. He's the man who allegedly ran down a Muslim family in London, Ontario last year with his pickup truck, killing 4 and injuring a young boy. Police say they found what appeared to be hate-related material on Veltman's devices. There's also evidence he may have been on the dark web, a place where extremists are known to spread hate. John Venevali Rao has more.
It was a horrific collision that police have said was an act of terror, alleging then 20-year-old Nathaniel Veltman deliberately drove a black Dodge pickup truck